How do we navigate things like cultural trends, current world events, and disagreement in church? Honest Conversations is a deeper dive into some of your important questions that we don't always have time to cover in a Sunday morning service. Ready to dive in? Let's join Andrew and Brooke for today's Honest Conversation.
All right, we're continuing our series on Pride Month with Honest Conversations with our pastor, joined by Heather Skriba and Pastor Andrew. And this episode, we are kind of doing a rapid fire, as rapid as we possibly can with the three of us. Questions from listeners, just kind of a random assortment. Okay? We're going to start off with pornography because the question is, this person is inclined to think that it is the gateway drug to all types of sexual immorality. It seems one strategy might be for the church to focus considerable energy in removing or at least curbing porn in some way. They used a secular example of fightthenewdrug.com. Is there a correlation between porn and lifestyle decisions?
Yes.
Yeah. How big?
I thought this was rapid fire. How big? Really big.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, there's so much that could be said. But honestly, I think that most of it is already said in a lot of places. I'm not one that, at least from my perspective, thinks that the church goes light on pornography, which is great because it's horrible and screws up with everything in your life, and it'll ruin everything, and it does ruin everything, and it will. And yeah, I think any sexual deviance is a gateway to more sexual deviance, just like any sin is really a gateway to more sin, and that's a huge problem. So, pornography young has big impacts on how you develop relational. I mean, there's all kinds of psychology and neurology out there on that, let alone the sociology and the spirituality behind it. But I think there's plenty of that out there for people to get, honestly.
Are there any thoughts on that?
I agree. I think, and Fight the New Drug is a solid, it's secular, but the science that they publish is really helpful in digging into, the neuroscience behind how it changes your brain and things like that, too. So,
my brother is living a gay lifestyle, and because our family won't celebrate it, he thinks we're aggressive, violent, and demeaning. Our family has gone above and beyond to love him well. It's just never enough because we don't see eye to eye on it. I think this is a lot of families, a lot of situations, Andrew.
It's really sad.
Yeah.
Really hard.
Is there any advice from either of you on how to continue to be in relationship with somebody who cannot see past your lack of affirmation?
Yeah. I think keep going on loving God, keep going on loving the person as best you know how to do it. And you got to let that lie where it goes, as far as you before God, that I don't think I'm violent and demeaning and stuff. I think I'm really trying. I think we've got to land there because, like we've said, in previous conversations, we can't evaluate our effectiveness purely on how people respond or don't respond or feel or don't feel. I think, honestly, similarly to how we talked about with the kids or workplace scenarios where we get called the bigot or we get called different things, we have to peacefully recognize that it takes two to tango in relationship. And, when any person chooses sin, and especially in big overt ways that then demand my affirmation of that sin in order for me to be in relationship with them, I'm not the one responsible for the distance that creates. That is a fruit. The wages of sin is death. So when I choose sin, it kills things. And when it kills relationship, that's not somebody else's fault. That doesn't mean that the family in this scenario is not responsible to be loving before God. Absolutely. Be loving and all of that. But your love alone can't necessarily or won't necessarily scrub over the reality of the situation that somebody is having sinful habits, thoughts, perceptions, perspectives, and is waiting for you to affirm and encourage all of that stuff before that person perceives you as loving. That's not your fault.
Heather, do you mind me asking, did you demand affirmation when you were in the LGBT community from family and friends? Was that something that you felt like you had to have in order to have receive love from them?
I wouldn't say I demanded it. I think it was more so I just knew what the limit of the relationship would be. And so I allowed for, maybe that sounds weird, I don't know. There were some compromises. So if people didn't want to call me by the name I had chosen, they would just call me Skriba. And so we found space to meet in the middle, but it also naturally limited where things went. And so I don't know if it was per se a demand, but it definitely is a limiting factor. And again, but those were in the seasons where my heart was like, I'm doing this no matter what. And so, of course, I didn't want to hear anything that was contrary to that. But then like I shared in another episode, when that elder said, hey, here's what we believe, we just want you to be aware, my heart was in a much different space. And so I think we look at someone's life and we see this little, even if it's years in the grand scheme of things, like it's not, we see this little blip and we think it's the forever, and a lot can change. I think a lot can change over time with the softness or hardness of someone's heart. And so what may not be perceived as loving in one moment will actually have a bigger impact down the road. And so I guess I just say that as encouragement of like, there is so much hope, and what is happening right now is not the forever. I mean, and my story is evidence of that, because there were people in my life who said they said they thought I was on that trajectory forever. And lo and behold, here we are.
Yeah.
And so like, there is just so much hope. And so like, there's so much hope, and like Jesus, he can redeem anything, and he can soften even the hardest hearts. And so it might not be happening at the pace we expect.
Andrew said, just keep going. Do we choose not to shop at stores with an active LGBTQ platform they are pushing and supporting, and rally other Christians to do the same? Or is that just creating further division? We've seen a lot of examples of this recently, boycotting that has been effective. And I've seen, some Christians really pumped up that it's working. Where should we stand on this one?
Yeah. If you want to, go for it.
Okay.
I don't think you have to. I don't think you're wrong if you do. I think that gets into way more of the idea category than the person category. So like, it's happening with Target right now. Like, Target's not a person, and which is true. And for example, for the people who are boycotting, what they're doing is they're trying to make an aggressive stand against ideas that they're saying, this is being pushed, and here's an opportunity I have to put a stake in the ground against the momentum of an idea.
Yeah.
I'm not
Which you
hating
can understand
people.
their
Right.
excitement
That's
about that. Like, we're
it's like, here's a thing.
finally taking a stand.
Right.
Yeah.
Totally. So it's like, it's not some person. There's, of course there's people who have, but it's not necessarily like, I hate LGBT people, that's why I'm not shopping at Target. It's like, no, here's another example of where the idea is taking over, and I have an opportunity to have a vote in the situation. And so I'm doing that. And this is how I'm doing that. And I am pumped to be able to do that. And that falls into the category of like, we all have different roles and different things, and we all have different ways of fighting different fights. And it's great when you, That being said, a Christian who shops at Target isn't necessarily affirming of the LGBT lifestyle.
What about the rallying other Christian side of it?
Yeah, I think that's totally fair too. It's like, I'm wound up about this, and I think here's an opportunity we have again to stand up against what's happening in the culture we're in the world we're in the dollars that we spend, with the votes that we have. Like, there is something we can do about this very real thing that exists and is happening and is not okay and is really, it's hurtful and all sorts of things. We have an opportunity to say something at this thing that is being forced or pushed on us, and not just because we went to Target, but it's like, this is everywhere and everything and seeping into everywhere and everything, and I have an opportunity now to say something. Yeah. What's your take?
Well, it makes me think of one of the sermons that you did on money, and how it's like we get to make our money work for us. And and again, if like your conscience is saying don't shop at Target or whatever, that is an opportunity to use money as the tool to do what we need it to do. And
totally.
So,
yeah. And I mean, it's like, this is an opportunity I have to stand up against, to tear down an idea that's setting itself up against the things of God. And it's like, great. That is true. It is an idea that has set itself up against the things of God. It is massively painful to individuals and to culture, and it is horrible. All of these ideas are awful ideas that are major problems that have serious ramifications in the real world for real people who God really loves, and it draws people away from God. That is absolutely a huge problem. And so, yeah, if you're like, we have a chance to do something about that, like, let's do that. We do that for all sorts of other terrible ideas in our culture too, and we try to pick that fight where we can pick that fight. And so if this is where you feel like you can pick that fight, go for it. And there's some people really close to me who are wound up about the Target boycott. And there's some people really close to me who are like, I didn't buy the swimsuit. And I was never going to buy the swimsuit. So I still went to Target, and it's like, great. Neither one of us think this is a good idea. Yeah. It's just we're fighting the fight in different ways.
Yeah. Any perspective on that?
No. I mean, and I guess it's kind of almost like a separate perspective of, this is one for me where I have really just opted to not be involved, because it brings up more things in my heart that are harder to navigate. Even just like, it just brings up emotions and things that are not worth the energy, and that's okay. And the things that I want to invest the energy is best spent elsewhere for me, and that's great.
It's a good word for all of us.
Absolutely, it is.
Whether you're in the movement or past or not, is this a good use of your energy? Like, and
for some it is.
Totally.
And for some it is.
Totally.
Okay.
Like,
Andrew,
let's work together on that. Like, and when there's divide and conquer, or, to maybe use a crass phrase, but that's okay.
Yeah.
Andrew, thoughts on attending an LGBT wedding? Example, a close friend who's not a Christian. They're not looking for my endorsement. They know I don't agree with it, but I have a concern that not attending would destroy any opportunity to connect with them going forward.
Yeah. So I think that's a big conscience decision as well, because I was having this conversation with two different men in our church the other night who were both sharing different, even specific examples of opportunities they had or whatever. And it was like, oh, wow, yeah, both of those situations have some very interesting details in them that are intriguing as it pertains to my initial reaction. So for me, how can I say this? So someone was talking to me recently, they're like, they're not even like Christians, and I don't even know if they're going to even talk about God at the wedding. So it's, because for me, I'm like, I think I see marriage as a sacrament, basically. It is a sacred thing that we are all here standing before God, recognizing what's happening now. That's my initial perception of what a wedding should be and what most weddings are, even if it's sort of a game for some people. But like we're at least like we have a pastor who like probably read the Bible and said like before God we're doing this, you know? And so like for me, I'm like, I'm not doing that. I'm not participating in that before God. Like that scares me. And that, you know, I think that also that thought process though does play into other weddings, even whatever, heterosexual weddings. There was a situation last summer that I found myself in that I was like, whoa, this is a weird one. And this whole thought process played into mine, and it impacted the way I did and didn't participate in different things. It was like, there's things that I'm being invited to that, to me, is a facade before God, based on all the people who are involved, and like it was what people are saying and doing. Like we're gonna do that and say it's before God. Like I'm not going to that. I'm not going to that. So does that make sense? Like that's just an example of a thought process to contribute to this thing, to say that's where certain things hit me on my conscience. Now, again, examples where people have asked, are like, well, they're not even Christians. They're not even going to say it's before God. I don't even think they're going to talk about God, which is sort of like, well, then what are we doing here anyways? And it's like, I don't know. That's why I'm here for my friend who doesn't know what to do with his son who's marrying a guy, you know? And I feel good about the fact that I'm here for my friend, regardless of what's going on here. It's like, oh, okay, I can see how you'd land there. Or I'm here for my sister who my niece is doing this, and I don't know what to do with that. And it is before God, but I'm going to be there for my sister. I'm not here for the wedding. I'm here for her. And, you know, somebody said, but you are at the wedding, you know, and it's like, okay, you know,
But
like,
what are you doing at the wedding?
What are you doing at the wedding? Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Like that's exactly right. You know, so that's where I say, I think there's a lot of room for the conscience in that, which is not to say it doesn't matter. It is to say it matters a lot. So where are you at? And figure out, what do you really think? Where are you really landing? And wherever you're really landing, don't betray that. Don't feel not good about this situation, but go anyways. And say it's because I'm just going to be here for this person. But on the inside, you know, you don't feel good about this. You know, and I had the same conversation with somebody recently about a Hindu wedding that they were invited to recently. They felt really uncomfortable because there was like Hindu practices going on. You know, it's like, like I don't want to be here. It's like, that's okay.
Any thoughts on it, Heather?
I think it's a conscience thing, 100%. I think there are, and the questions that I, similar to like the pronouns saying the questions that I would ask are really, what is my relationship with this person? What is their relationship with God? And then kind of go from there. It's like, what is my role in this person's life? And I think there's not going to be that cut and dry. It's always a simple answer because there's a lot of nuance. But knowing that you can say no, again, and kind of like the workplace thing, like you can say no however you need to say no, is all, like, it doesn't have to be a stance against whatever is happening or for whatever is happening. You can say no for whatever reason. And I think that even just for me eases my worry about if it doesn't have to be any more costly than it needs to be. And like, I think you made that point.
But I'm willing for the cost to be whatever it has to be.
Right. And so, and so I think it's just like, there's levels of things to navigate, and ultimately those things are going to come down to, what is Jesus asking me to do in this situation? And he's faithful to guide us. And so.
Somebody said, I'd love to hear about how church discipline relates to this issue. Suppose someone claims to be a Christian and promotes Pride Month to the community or at work or as the mayor of a town. or the superintendent of a school district, should this person face any challenge at church? And if he or she faces no challenge, should the pastor of that church be challenged by pastors of other churches in the area? I feel like this is for you, Andrew.
Yeah, it's a great question. So a couple of different things maybe. Yes, I think there has to be room in our relationships to challenge each other on our lives. Like that's a essential part of the Christian community. And we should talk about that. I think part of what we've talked about in this conversation is there's a lot more room for conscience decisions while than maybe we initially think. Like this isn't just all the scenarios. The reason we've been talking for hours is because there's not one conversation to have here, which is, do we affirm the LGBTQ plus do we affirm the whole lifestyle or do we not? No, we don't. But that's not the conversation we're having. You know what I'm saying? Like we're talking about a lot of other stuff. Mm-hmm. And so there's room for all of us to answer that first question. No, we don't affirm these. This is sin. It's against God. It's not what we're about. Blah, blah, like, great. We're all on the same page there. But now we're actually talking about a lot of different things. And so a lot of we have to have room and grace for each other in all of those different conversations. So I think we have to be able to challenge each other. I think we have to challenge each other full of grace and full of truth and with humility. And we've talked, I think just now, it's like the funny thing about conscience stuff is that it's what I think. And I can't imagine that somebody would think something different because it's what I think. But it's helpful to know there's actually room. You might actually have a different thought on this than I do.
But yet, this is an ultimate issue, right?
Well, so the question is, well, what issue are we talking about? Are we talking about...
Okay, so I'll give an example. Say he said a superintendent of a school. Say a Christian superintendent is promoting LGBTQ at their school. Mm-hmm. And they attend a church. Mm-hmm. Nothing's being done. Right. Everyone's just kind of acting like nothing happened. Like it has the church, big C church maybe, become lax on holding people accountable for this. Is it a conscience decision? Yep. Is it an ultimate issue?
Totally. Yep, totally. So there's kind of like, what do I do as an individual and what does the church do as the church? Yeah. As individuals, I'm encouraging everybody, talk to each other. Please. Talk to each other with grace and with love and with patience and understanding and conviction and conscience and empathy and understanding and conviction. Now, all of the things. Talk to each other. If you see somebody doing something, whether it's regards this or some other sin thing, talk to each other. Talk to each other about it. Like, hey, tell me more about what that was about. And as it pertains to this issue, the conscience level things like, hey, you're the marketing director at XYZ Corporation, and I saw they made this post, which I'm assuming ran through you. I can't imagine, what I'm communicating is I can't imagine how you could let that happen. That's where it's coming. But like, hey, instead of like, you were wrong in that, like, hey, tell me about that. Like, there's probably a lot going on there at your workplace that your job is on the line for, and you probably had some conversations, but like, also, let's care enough about each other to approach each other about things, but we can do it with grace and understanding and all of those sort of things. The goal is to be unified and on the same team and build each other up, knowing that sometimes that involves some correction, but very rarely in my life am I right from a distance as it pertains to correction. Usually there's at least some conversation that needs to happen. There's probably at least one or two things I don't know about here. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So on an individual level, that's what I'm encouraging everybody to is, that Ephesians 4, like with patience and humility, building each other up in the unity of the Spirit. Like that's how we need to approach all things as it pertains to this. So that's like individual stuff. Some of these other things that he's zooming out on that. So I think I saw this question submitted. This did have names. I don't remember what they were, but there was names on this. In our city, there's some Christian superintendent who's at a church in town who is affirming, from what I gather, kind of we'll say the whole LGBTQ agenda in the school as a system, or maybe a primary elementary school, or whatever he or she is over. So.
And they go to a specific church.
Right, and so they go to a church, and they're like advocating for all of this stuff. So, how do I answer this question? Yes, I think that's a problem. Yes, I think that person should be approached by church leadership and handle that situation in any number of ways that it needs to be handled, depending on how each conversation goes with this person. There's that. That's what I think in principle. I also have no opinion personally about whoever this person is, whatever church this person goes to, and the pastor, because I have no idea what conversations have or haven't happened, what the church is or isn't doing, where in the process they may or may not be in all of those conversations. And I do know that, I don't believe that pastor is responsible to me, and I don't believe that superintendent is responsible to me. I do believe that both of them are responsible before God, and so I am praying and hoping that they're both doing what they need to be doing before God to be right with Him. And I'm going to believe that about them, that they're doing that, because that's what I would want somebody believing about me from a distance who didn't understand what I was or wasn't doing or may not be doing about a situation that they have an opinion about. And I want to pray for them to do that. So that's what I would do for myself, and so that's what I want to do for them. And I think that that's important. And some people could disagree with me on that, but I think that's why, it's important to, I am not going to go research this church or whatever, because I'm like, well, I'm sure there's probably elders involved. There's probably some sort of church governance structure that church operates under. And I'm going to believe that pastor is submitted to God in mutual submission with his leadership. They're working it through, and they're doing what needs to be done, and they're handling it as best they know how to, because that's what I would be doing in this situation. I'd be trying to be submitted to church leadership, church governance. I'd be trying to have the conversations, navigating it well with all of whatever the details are that I have no idea about in this situation. So I don't think I'm skirting the issue. I think that it's clear that it needs to be addressed, but I don't have an opinion on how it may or may not be being addressed currently in this exact environment, because nobody asked my opinion on it who's involved and actually responsible for it. I don't believe I'm responsible to God for how that pastor handles this person. I do think I'm responsible to God for how I, from a distance, treat that person.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Next question. On the general topic, what thoughts in Scripture do you have or have you shared with people that you found to be especially effective at getting to people's hearts and minds? Andrew, I'll start with you, and Heather, if you have any that you'd like to share too.
Is this like a general hearts and minds, or is it related to, is there specificity on?
Just on the LGBT issue, What thoughts in Scripture have you shared with people that you have found to be especially effective? Yeah, at getting to hearts and minds.
Yeah, I don't have a magic bullet.
Okay.
Yeah. It's effective in what sense?
Exactly.
Effective in changing behavior, no, but effective in wooing someone's heart to the Lord. I think there are places to point them to be hey, I really connected with the Lord here. But again, I think I would be curious what the reason behind the question was, and what does effective mean in this context. So,
okay.
And I think it might be helpful to think about the person and ideas thing. Is that what we're saying is well, what would I give to anybody who wants to connect with God in the Bible? That's probably the best thought process to go. It's not just a lesbian. What does a lesbian need in the Bible? It's what does a person need to connect with God in the Bible? Again, you probably know an answer or two to that question already for yourself. On the flip side of it, though, I think is the whole idea thing, which is a separate issue that is okay. So Genesis 1, 2, and 3 are the foundational worldview scriptures on here's what I believe, why I believe it, what design is, why I think it's the design, why I think God is God and I am not, why I believe that, why men and women are like. So if you want to talk ideas, then I want to go to Scripture to have my worldview shaped, my thought process shaped, and so that I can use the weapons of our warfare to tear down ideas that set themselves up against the knowledge of God. But that's like a separate question than like, oh, you are struggling to hear the voice of God. What verses should I point you to? If you want to debate ideas, that's a separate set of verses, in that way, if that makes
More
sense.
theology versus,
Yeah, sort of, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's a question you can even ask back to yourself, like, gosh, what verses help my mind and heart when I am whatever, like when I am struggling with whatever, like when I need to know that I am loved, when I need to know that I am whatever, like what verses do I turn to, but to not weaponize them and say, oh, like you really need to know that you're loved. But if it's truly coming from a place of like, wow, like you are asking me, I just don't know if God loves me. Sweet. Like we can work with that. But again, it's like, are these being weaponized versus is there a true hunger?
All right. Last question. Andrew, how would Jesus approach Pride Month?
Oh my goodness. Really well. He would love God with all his heart, soul, mind, and strength, and he would love his neighbor as himself. I think he would do everything we've talked about. I think we've talked a lot about Jesus and loving like him. And yeah. Okay, maybe I'll talk more just because we're at the very end. But I think the ideas and people thing is huge. And I think that we need to understand that even as we view Jesus and view Scripture. Because people build a caricature of Jesus one way or the other when you don't delineate between people's and ideas. People will say Jesus was just this pushover who never told anybody they did anything wrong because he was loving and gracious and gentle. And it's like, have you read the Bible? Like, what are you talking about? He was wild. And then vice versa, like Jesus was this firebrand who just ran around pointing his finger at people. And it's like, have you read the Gospels? Like, really? Because he did both. And we have to learn from him on what did you do when and why? What were you up to? What were you up to in this moment? And we can't make a caricature that, well, he didn't condemn the woman caught in adultery. Well, he also told her to go and sin no more. He didn't use the words she wanted him to use. He didn't say it was no big deal. He was saying, yeah, you do deserve to die right now for your sin. But I'm going to take that now. You go and sin no more because that's what you're doing, and that's a bad thing, and you should not do that anymore. So let's not do that. Not because it's no big deal, because it is a big deal. But let's do better. Let's go forward, And so it's like, wow, don't oversimplify it for your own sake because you're not willing to think about it. You're not willing to sacrifice your own agenda in whichever direction, It's like, well, perfect. Let's just talk about sin. It's like, no, if you want to be like him, let's try to really be like him, And then there's the whole like flipping the temple and stuff. It's like, yeah, he was like snapping the whip at people, spilling all their stuff, telling them they were terrible to people. Not just ideas. He wasn't just saying the theory of what's happening here is a bad thing. He was saying that like this is different. You are making this temple something it is not, and so that's an idea thing. And he was really mad at all of those people for doing what they were doing because they were doing something bad, and it was an affront to God, and it was costing other people. And so it's like, wow, this is interesting. Like Jesus would be totally himself completely. And that's fascinating. So who is he? Who is he? And how do I know him? And how do I learn from him? And how do I then engage the world like he does? Which really is just saying, how do I engage the world like he engages me? That's what we've been talking about. Like my kids need what I need. The world needs what I need. And that's the love of God and the grace of God, the truth that we need Jesus. So who is he? Do you know him? Because you can't theorize about this spiritual leader Jesus out there and then go try to be him and say nothing. Like have some substance in in your revelation of Jesus. And when you do, it'll help you stay a lot more calm and unoffendable in the midst of all the noise, you'll spot the fakes, you'll spot the caricatures, you'll spot the substanceless comments and claims and all this stuff, and it's just like, no, that's not what we're, no.
Yeah.
So you got to go there with him for sure.
Heather, how has your understanding of Jesus shifted as you've shifted?
Can you elaborate what you're
Yeah,
getting at?
I mean, you've been through such a transformative journey in your life, and you've been a Christian through much of it. How has your understanding of the man Jesus transformed as you have?
First, it's hard to put in.
Or maybe like your faith journey, or where do you now stand? What is like your rock? Like, has that changed? Like what? And if it's too complicated, that's okay. I just would love to know, like, today I am.
Yeah.
And I was, as far as where he's brought you.
I mean, today, like, I am the beloved, and like I am the disciple who Jesus loves.
Wow.
And I think that has come in so many different ways. But at the end of the day, like, it comes down to, like, I know that he loves me, and he he loves me more than I ever knew he could love me. And I think that that changes everything.
Heather, thank you so much for being with us through this long conversation.
Can I share an observation to that same question for her?
Yes.
I think that my observation is, like, I would have said basically the same thing. Like, you are clearly a child and a disciple of God, and you're not just like a self trying to find yourself, That's what I think, that's the life you live, that I see you living, and have watched you grow in a lot in the last few years. I'm really proud of you for that.
I know, thinking about who, even coming to Indianapolis, 4.5 years ago, I'm like, wow,
I know.
Things are so different.
Yeah.
And he's just so good and has shown me so much of who he is. And it's amazing.
And it's because you've grown as a disciple every day. Like, that's what I've seen you do. That's why I would say the disciple who Jesus is, like, that's who you are. You're a disciple of Jesus. You're not like some other thing just because of your story, like, that's all still true too, but like, I know you and have seen you and observed you, and, I just know that it's true, that this isn't just like, you haven't just been working on this issue for 4.5 years or whatever. You've been going after Jesus and growing in him and becoming more of who he's called you to be.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And it's beautiful. Yeah. Honored to call you friend. Thank you both for all of the insight.
Thank you.
And thank you for listening if you hung with us for this long. But we will have more topics for sure to come on Honest Conversations with your pastor.
That's all for today's Honest Conversation.